Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us on our greenhouse gas emissions inventory webinar. We're really glad that you're here with us. My name is Lisa Francioni. I am the Deputy Director of the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance, and here today with this great panel that we'll be getting into today. This is a webinar, so we have both a chat feature if you have any comments you want to make, but also a Q&A. So if you'd like to ask any questions, please just go ahead and type in your question there, and we'll get to multiple times throughout to be able to answer some questions, especially at the end as well. And so just so you can know what to expect, I'm going to provide a very quick overview of a climate action project that this is really coming from. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. John Heckman, who is a wine sustainability expert, has been working with the California wine industry for many years now on sustainability topics to really go over what do we mean by a greenhouse gas inventory? What is it? How do you do it? And then from there, I'm going to turn it over to Ana Ferreira, who is the Director of Legislative and Regulatory Affairs at Wine Institute. And she's going to share kind of what we know about California's climate reporting bill, SB 253. And so that will help kind of set the stage for a more detailed discussion about how Erin Stainthorpe from Jackson Family Wines, who's the Director of Sustainability, and also Molly Shepard, Director of Winery Strategies from Spotswood Estate Vineyard and Winery, how they have used greenhouse gas inventories within their own operations. So that's kind of what's going to be included in today's webinar. So as I mentioned, we are wrapping up an almost 3-year project. And in this project, it was really focused on what is the latest that we know about climate change impacts, especially to California wine grapes. And then also, what are the adaptation strategies that we could all be paying attention to and turning towards to be able to address these challenges? So through that, we have extensive literature review, we have a summary handout, that's all available within this climate action toolkit that we created as part of this project. We worked with a lot of different wine growers from different size operations from all over California throughout the entire project to really make sure the information that we're trying to get and share within the industry is going to be useful to you all. And then it also includes an education and outreach component as well. And so really it culminated into this climate action toolkit, which is now live. The link is right there, the cswaclimatetoolkit.org. But it really goes into background on why climate action is needed. It covers a whole learn section that really talks about what are these terms and concepts that you'll hear about within the climate action space. And it goes into detail on how to actually create a climate action plan and guidance to do that, including a template and other resources so you can really start to understand what are the risks within my operation and then how do I begin to address those risks. And then finally, it includes a lot of resources and tools to help you actually implement those practices. So I just wanted to share a couple screenshots so you can see there is this process laid out where you can go through step 1, step 2, step 3. With step 1, learning about that background I mentioned. Step 2, really assessing where are you today with many of what are sustainability practices that also relate to climate change mitigation and adaptation. And then how you actually can put some of that into a climate action plan. And then step 3 is really the specific guidance, specific tools and resources to really help you implement any of those practices that you identified within your plan. And then this one just really shows the different topics that are covered within this toolkit. So you can see on the vineyard side, it talks about adaptation, soil health, drought resiliency, energy efficiency. Within the winery, energy as well, packaging, water and solid waste. And then we include the supply chain as well, since it's such a critical piece of climate action. So sustainable purchasing, working with your suppliers, and then also vehicles and transportation. So that's just a quick snapshot. I hope you do go take a quick look over there and get to use this tool when you have some time to delve into it. And with that, I will turn it over to you, John.
Awesome. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. And can you see that, Lisa?
Yep.
All right, so we've got a great group here, and I really appreciate the opportunity for us all to talk about this. This is something that many of us have been working on for quite some time. Many of us are coming into this conversation anew. We obviously have new regulatory requirements going on within the state of California that are going to be applicable to many of the folks in our industry. And Anna's going to be able to give us some insights into where that's going from a legislative perspective, so that'll be great. But we want to kind of run through the basics, make sure that it's covering pretty well about what inventories are, why we're doing them, how you get them done, but also then give you some insights here from Aaron and Molly from their own perspectives. So I will be pushing through some of these basic elements of it. Obviously, this will be recorded, and so you can go back to those elements if you need to. From a why side of things, I think it's pretty clear to most of us about the somewhat essentially the moral imperative we all have to act here. We are still driving towards this substantial decarbonization of our economy as quickly as possible, and so net zero is the goal that we're all pursuing. However, even if all of us on that same page, knowing where each of us are individually, it helps us build that roadmap that's going to be appropriate for our own organization. And that's really where an inventory provides that detail that is required to know what your organization should be focusing on. We are talking about climate change, and there's always two pieces of that discussion. You've heard some of those words already from Lisa. There's the adaptation side and the mitigation side. I always think about this as, what is the world doing to you? That's adaptation. What are you doing to the world? That's mitigation. How am I going to reduce my climate impacts? And this is where inventories live. So we'll really focusing on that. When Anna's talking about the legislative elements, many people, you've probably heard of SB 261, which is the climate risk side of the legislation. That's on the adaptation side. We'll be talking about 253 today and the greenhouse gas protocol inventories, which is on the mitigation side of things. Now, as I said before, we already know what our big impacts are, and we're going to get a lot more detail from Aaron and Molly also, as they're showing their own specific efforts, both from their own operations and through IWCA. But this is a representation you've probably seen quite a bit. This is from the Wine Institute and CSWA's carbon footprint from about 10 years ago. It's still very applicable. And so we roughly know where our hotspots are. And so I guess one of the points we always want to make is that we should be taking action right now, even before we do an inventory. We don't need to wait for the inventory to be done before we can start prioritizing action. We just did another webinar, two webinars prior to this, one focusing on vineyards, one on wineries. Some great resources, great discussions in those that you can dig into. But again, the inventory is what makes it specific to you, and they're becoming more of a focus of not just regulatory focus, but also many customer requirements. If you look at what's coming through from some of the international markets, for example, there's more specific requirements around not just knowing your inventory, but actually taking action on that and showing it on a per product basis. So quite an active part of our market here. So let's dig into, again, how this is going to work into our organization. So much of this, I'm talking about it being specific to your company and what your own impacts are. You will see both from Aaron and from Molly that will then go into a prioritization of action. And so that idea of a roadmap, I think, is fundamental. So doing an inventory without focusing on improvement and how you can do better in the future, both on doing a better inventory, but also reducing your impacts. This is management, right? This is how we are trying to drive sustainability into our organizations. And so keep in mind that this baseline that we have here on the side here, that is what you can do with an inventory. That is the data coming out of this, establishing where you are right now in time. And then from that point forward, measuring and all of the outcomes, all the results of your improvement efforts going on from that point forward. A point that I always emphasize, I think if people heard me speak, they probably said, John, you've shown this slide many, many times, and I'll keep on showing it, is that especially those of us who are in kind of the sustainability or climate or carbon side of the field, we like to think that we have this moral position, that people just are automatically going to agree that we need to take climate action. But we just need to consistently remind ourselves that climate action has to compete for resources just like any other priority. All of our companies, all of our senior executives are going to agree that this is a priority, but there's dozens of other priorities that are in front of them at the same time. And so making sure we can talk about this from a perspective of business decision making, from how the climate realities that are affecting our markets are impacting our own revenue, cost, brand, and risk sorts of discussions is just critical. And so if this is kind of a newer idea to you to think about business language in the context of climate and greenhouse gases, I just take that as an opportunity for you to dig a little deeper into this. Again, we spent more time in this on one of the last webinars, but the more you can speak in the language of the rest of the business, the more effective you're going to be. So now just real quick on a greenhouse gas 101 basis, making sure that we are all clear. I think this is one of these things that sometimes we do ourselves a disservice by expecting people to just know what we mean by these words. And so obviously the greenhouse effect is from our atmosphere, holding in heat from the sun. And so that is fundamental to enabling life on our planet, but we have been increasing its effectiveness because we've been putting more gases into the atmosphere that are increasing how much heat we can trap in the atmosphere. And so those gases, generally we talk about carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and then these fluorinated gases. Those are those that are the most related to human activity. There are many, many others that have greenhouse effects, but those are the ones that are primarily focused upon and specifically focused on by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which I've got listed here. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol is the most recognized standard. It's been around for more than 20 years. It is regularly reviewed and revised and updated, and it provides the guidance for how you do an inventory in your organization. And again, when you think of a greenhouse gas inventory, you should think of accounting. And in fact, you can say that the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is analogous to the generally accepted accounting principles in accounting. And so GHG Protocol is providing the rule set for us to go in and say, all right, systematically across the scope of our operations that is appropriate, we'll talk about that in a second, what are all of the greenhouse gases that we're releasing, or if we're pulling them in from the atmosphere. Both of those things get into that accounting. And so that really is what it is. And it's a very established practice, many people with a lot of expertise, but also I think reasonably approachable for somebody who's coming at it for the first time. This last little bit at the end is the part that can get a little confusing. When people start talking about scope 3 or whatever, it's often there's at least some percentage of the audience that lets their eyes glaze over. This is getting at kind of a fundamental structure of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. It is a total feature. It's not a bug. It's not a problem. It's a feature because if you think about it from a business perspective, if I own an operation that is emitting greenhouse gases, obviously I'm going to have to account for that. But if I somehow put it into my supply chain, if I sold it off to a supplier, I shouldn't necessarily get off scot-free for that, right? I'm still influencing that, and now I'm just buying that service from the supplier. And so that's what we use these words, direct and indirect, and the scopes 1, 2, 3, and all the categories to explain. And specifically, a direct emission, which we also call scope 1, are emissions that we are directly burning something or releasing something like a refrigerant into the atmosphere. Very straightforward. The indirect emissions are things that we are essentially paying somebody for. And there's a special one called scope 2, which is related to energy. So usually, primarily, it's electricity. And then scope 3 is a whole set of other categories. And in fact, this picture right here is kind of the standard picture that is out there. This is from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And you see all these categories that are additional things. So whether I'm paying somebody for a product, good, a purchased good or service, or if I am paying someone for transportation services, inbound or outbound, if I'm looking at capital investments, business travel, all those things have greenhouse gas ramifications. And so there is this explicit double counting that we're doing. So every time that I have a scope 2 or a scope 3 emission, somebody else in the world is having a scope 1 emission related to that. But that is built into the system. And if you want to dig into that, we can dig into that. If you want to just smile and nod your head and say, okay, I believe you, John, that's probably the best way to do it. But I'll guarantee you it actually does make sense. So the last thing I'll just say is this is a very well-established process. It's been going on for a long time, as I've said. With that said, it has always got nuances. There's always discussion going on. Uh, as you apply it into any organization, it has the same pieces as financial accounting. You have to understand the scope. You have to understand time periods. You have to set a plan for that. You have to think through all of the different parts of your organization that can have an interaction with greenhouse gases. And then a lot of data, a lot of units, a lot of translation of that data. And if I'm burning so much gasoline, how much does that translate into CO2 equivalents? Again, all that's available to us from the greenhouse gas protocol. A lot of it is directed, a lot of guidance within the toolkit that Lisa is pointing to already, and a lot of guidance available. But just for those of you who have been doing it for a little while, you'll also know that there are consultants that can provide you lots of insights in this. There's software that can support you as well. So a lot of resources to turn this into something that can really be a part of your business and providing insights over time. I'll just emphasize two things here at the end is that uh, inventories are done regularly. Many organizations, I'd say most organizations, and especially as we get into the 253 world, that we'll be doing them manually. And that means it's like any other business process. You need to document what you're doing and need to improve over time. So this idea of a greenhouse gas inventory management plan, which is kind of telling yourself what you've done. Also, it's how you tell your verifiers how you've done it, so they can verify your numbers. Same thing as an accountant having a firm audit their books. That is incredibly important, not just from a verification perspective, but also from a continual improvement basis. And then the last step is around improvement. We started the whole discussion around how do we use these as ways to drive improvement in the organization. I'm really excited to hear from Aaron and Molly because they essentially are organizations who have put this as a high priority already, and you'll see some really great examples from that. So I'm going to stop right there, and we're going to jump right into Anna and giving some insights into the where we are from a legislative perspective, because this is something that is coming due soon. But as Anna will say, there's still a lot of kind of wiggle room as the state and CARB and everyone else is trying to figure out exactly how to make that happen. Before I let you go, please use the question function within Zoom there and get questions into us, and we will either answer them as we go or we will get to them at the end of the discussion. So with that, Lisa, why don't you grab a hold of the screen again, and we'll get into Anna.
Hey, thanks, John. And good afternoon. Glad to see you all interested in this topic. I've been asked to provide an overview and update of SB 253. It was actually signed into law in 2023, and it's California's climate reporting bill. Just by way of introduction, I'm the Director of Legislative and Regulatory Affairs at Wine Institute. I've been there just over 2 years now. Prior to that, I was the Director of Legislative and International Affairs at the California Energy Commission. And prior to that, I was the Deputy Secretary for Legislative Affairs at the California Environmental Protection Agency. So moving along, you can go to the next slide, Lisa. Just a little bit of legislative history. We've set some really vigorous targets for GHG reduction. AB 32 is the one that you would hear most about from 2006. And what that did was set targets for GHG reduction over time, 2030, at least 40% reduction below the baseline 1990 levels. And then in 2045, we're expected to be at 85% GHG reduction below 1990 levels. These are ambitious targets. There's debate about whether we will reach them, especially at this time in our history. But the recent climate laws, the Senate bills SB 253, which I'll be talking about shortly, and SB 261, John mentioned earlier, that bill all co-authored by Senator Weiner as well. These were part of a uh, climate package that the governor worked with these two authors to move forward. Again, a very different time when they were introduced and passed. And this was at the forefront of the governor's priorities in that year. The Climate Risk Reporting Bill 261 was focused on mitigation, as John mentioned, looking at climate risk for those companies with a revenue level of over 500 million, biannual reporting, and also mitigation, which means, what are you doing to address those climate risks that you are identifying? And then SB 219 was in 2024. That was a cleanup bill that, after there was much concern raised about the reporting requirements, deadlines were extended, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Next slide, please, Lisa. So SB 253 is the one we're focused on now. I think, John's right. It's important to be paying attention because these are requirements that are coming. Um, Reporting entities doing business in California with more than $1 billion in annual revenue. That's revenue across the board, not just in California. Doing business in California is also to be defined. They're looking at things like, tax law, the definitions in tax law and other areas. I wish I had more to say in a definitive way about these things, but at this point, CARB is now going through the process. It's an informal process right now of gathering information from stakeholders. With the intention of issuing draft proposed regulations by the end of the year. But in statute now, it's expected that scope 1 and 2 emissions will be required to be disclosed beginning in 2026, and then scope 3 in 2027. That was extended in that SB 219 I mentioned earlier. It allows, and also because of concern, it does allow for existing reporting standards to be used, such as the GHG protocol. So if you're using existing reporting standards to measure your GHG, that can be used in the reporting for SB 253, at least in the first year. And then it provides for CARB to uh, recoup their funding that they expend for administration and implementation costs through fee authorities. So there will be fees asked for by CARB from reporting entities or to address their administration and implementation costs. And that will be taken out of the fees they charge. Next slide, please. So enforcement flexibility. Um, Again, people are very concerned about what is going to be required. I'm with John. If you start measuring, then you'll know what you've got. You'll feel a lot more comfortable knowing, you can't report on what you don't measure. So it's important to do that and get started. But because of the concern about reporting, CARB issued an enforcement notice in December saying, they're going to consider the first year a transition. There'll be no penalties in that first year, provided that entities demonstrate good faith efforts to comply with the requirements of the law. And you can show, this is where you're getting your data from. CARB to provide details for subsequent year reporting cycles as part of the rulemaking process, which we still have not begun yet. But all of that is coming. And again, a little more lenient in that first year, and you can use existing data for those initial emission reports. Next slide. So again, I mentioned because of the concern about reporting, SB 219, co-authored by Weiner and Stern, was passed in 2024 as a cleanup bill. It adjusted the timelines, some flexibility, and reporting adjustments, and clarified that CARB will set the schedule for Scope 3 disclosures to begin in 2027. It also added a parent level consolidation option that allows for the parent level reporting. They'll still be asking for information, but it will not be required directly from some of the supply chain type entities. It can be consolidated at that parent level per 219. Next slide. So this slide I borrowed from CARB. The first two bubbles are historic, looking at climate disclosure program direction and development. So in 2023, that was when 253 and 261 were passed. Again, it was a team effort with the governor. And in 2024 was the 219 amending and extending deadlines. CARB did a initial outreach. It started in December of 2024 and went through March, asking for informal information on what was out there already on the bill. And CARB received, I think, close to 300 comments on from companies and stakeholders on 253 and 261. Those middle bubbles are where we are right now. Climate disclosure, pre-rulemaking, informal workshops have begun. There was just one about a week ago to identify regulatory concepts, to discuss alignment with legislative intent. And if you were at that workshop, Senator Allen had one of his representatives, one of his staff come and talk a little bit more about what the intent was. Um, Oh, I'm sorry. I am mixing this up with another bill. No, Weiner did not have staff at that regulatory workshop. Boy, too many bills going on right now. Sorry, it's a busy time in the legislature. But with this one, they did have quite a few stakeholders present to talk about the definitions. What are we going to mean by doing business in California? Where is the definition for some of the reporting entity requirements. So they're discussing alignment with legislative intent and solicit public and stakeholder input. So that the first one was last week, as was the one um, for the other Allen bill. Climate disclosure and formal rulemaking is the part that is still ahead of us. A lovingly called SRIA report is required. That is the standardized regulatory impact assessment that must be done when there is when the state estimates that a proposed regulation is going to cost more than $500 million. And that will, there's components to that. There's a statement of need, a baseline data request. There's a cost benefit analysis, a number of things that I'm sure CARB is diligently working on right now, and that will be released. And then they'll issue a notice of proposed rulemaking. There'll be draft regulatory text, which is here's what we propose will be our guiding principles and text for regulation. Initial staff report on that, environmental and economic analyses, all of that will be introduced. And then we will have a series of deadlines and they will be set in stone, a 45-day comment period, whereby stakeholders will then be able to comment on the text, what it means for them, cost, whatever they feel CARB needs to know about that information. And there can be additional comment periods depending on what they hear from stakeholders in that first one. And once Carbit has all the information that they believe they need to go forward, they will issue the final draft regs that will be adopted by CARB at a board meeting, final staff report, and then that package will then go to the Office of Administrative Law. All of these will have very set timelines, so you'll need to pay attention to what those say and when the deadlines are so you can provide comments. Of course, Wine Institute will do that as well. And after that, OAL has about 30 days to approve or disapprove. They usually approve the text, and then implementation will begin. And I think that's all I have for that bureaucratic process. But the important thing to know is that these things are moving forward. We will be, there will be requirements for reporting out. And again, the data will be very important, and being able to show where you've got it from is also very important.
Awesome. I guess great. I appreciate you giving us the insight on it, and definitely something we've all been thinking about and hearing a lot about. So it's good to see the details there. Aaron, I think we're going to switch over to you and now give us a perspective from yourselves and from IWCA, where you guys have been working on this for years already. This is not necessarily something new for you.
Great. Yeah, happy to share with everybody here and excited to dive deeper into the topic. Can people see my screen right now? Is this coming through?
No, just see you.
Okay, let me change that.
Not just see you. I mean, it's great to see you.
Can you see my slide now?
Yeah.
Yes, got it.
Perfect. Great. Well, I will probably try to keep some of this presentation quick just because I'm hoping there's time for Q&A. And in this presentation, I'll be wearing two hats. One, I'll be talking about the work that we're doing at Jackson Family Wines. And I'll also be talking about some of the work that Jackson Family Wines is doing as part of IWCA, which stands for International Wineries for Climate Action. And that's an organization that both Jackson Family Wines and Spotwood, so Molly will also speak to this as well, but that's a place where we've been able to share best practices in this exact space. So let me dive in and talk about kind of how we have used greenhouse gas accounting as a way to really take our desire to be climate leaders and put it into practice, and how we actually think it's a competitive business advantage. So right here, Jackson Family Wines really has been doing sustainability work since 2008, and we've probably cemented a lot of our public goals on sustainability. So you can see here, we've put out, like, our ambition is to be climate positive by 2050 across here scopes 1, 2, and 3. And so we're talking about what those are, but just we're trying to reduce all of our emissions. And we've been using our greenhouse gas inventory as a way to really understand that quite well. So that's what we've done as a company at Jackson Family Wines. Separately, in 2019, the Jackson family and then Familia Torres, which is another similar sized winery in Spain, came together and said, we need to work together on this. And I think really, there's a broader message that all of us individually need to take action, but for that to actually have an impact, it really helps to be able to move as an industry. And so IWCA, International Wineries for Climate Action, we're really trying to decarbonize the wine industry. And so I'm really proud to say that at this point, since 2019 to today, there's about 50 members, and we represent about 3.5% of global wine production. So you can think of that as big or small. I personally think that's big to be able to see that. And I think when you talk about tipping points, like, what is it going to take to make a meaningful impact? It's all of us today on this call, and it's kind of taking greenhouse gas accounting and then using that to make really targeted action. So some of the things that IWCA has done, I guess this really speaks to our footprint. And we've actually had some new members join just in the last week. So we're trying to expand and get more wineries in more countries here. And all of this is actually on our website, which I'll make sure to share a link in the chat. But really, IWCA is very focused on climate action. and greenhouse gas accounting is a key component of that, right? We like to say, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so understanding greenhouse gas accounting, absolutely key. And then once we do that measurement, once you get a sense of, usually you'd call it your benchmark or where you are, then it's trying to figure out how do we decarbonize, and really, me and Molly both within IWCA, how do we share best practices, right? Because all of us are unique, but we all have similar challenges. We all have similar hotspots. So what this looks like in practice, and this is coming from IWCA, so this is for the wine world, but I actually think this is very universal for most companies. Scope 3, which usually it's easy just to call supply chain emissions, that is so much bigger than anything else for most businesses. And then within this, we can dive in deeper, and you can start to see some hotspots emerge. So I'll walk through what some of these are. And I do think, as John alluded to earlier, we all have very similar hotspots, right? And this is using the GHG protocol that John outlined earlier. And for those who maybe haven't done greenhouse gas accounting before, I think the thing that I'd really recommend is going to the IWCA website. And as a starting point, one of the best things you can do is use the free IWCA greenhouse gas calculator. That's a really good way to start getting your head around what this means. And I think if you haven't done a greenhouse gas inventory before, just the terms are very daunting. And I think it can be scary, it can be unfamiliar. I think the easiest thing is just to get started, because just by entering things, you start to get some familiarity. So this is a different view. This is actually, I think, from 2023 of, the IWCA hotspots. And one of the things that's cool about this is with IWCA, you can see for this in 2023, it's an average of these 23 members. So every winery is going to be different, but here you can see some pretty common trends. So scope 1 is emissions that's happening at the actual properties. Scope 2 is electricity, and scope 3 is the supply chain emissions. And so again, you're going to see the same themes over and over again. And if you just use hotspots, you can figure out kind of steps you can take. But if you really want to be targeted, you kind of want to understand your own inventory. This is actually, that last slide was from 2023. This one's from 2024. So IWCA just put out a new annual report. You can see if you really want to dive in, you can get much more granular with the sources of emissions. And I like the way this is laid out. You can start to, again, think scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, but it does help it depends on how detailed you want to get. This is the way IWCA calculates it. And again, these hotspots here, we've seen from our members, purchased grapes was pretty high, packaging, which, I'm sure we're going to talk quite a bit about, and I want to show a case study. Transporting wine is pretty significant, fuel use, and then electricity use. But this shot right here actually represents, not for IWCA, but for Jackson Family Wines, what our greenhouse gas emissions look like. This is actually a little older. This is from 2021, but I just pulled it because I thought it was, the way it's organized here is helpful. It's easy to get stuck on terminology. And so again, my biggest piece of advice is, if you haven't done an inventory, just get started, because even doing it, you start to get a better understanding of your business. But here, same nomenclature as before. Scope 1, these are emissions that are happening on site. So you can see for us, our farming operations and our fuel use, those are pretty significant. We can see right here, it's a little off, but in scope 3, our supply chain emissions, glass bottles, that comes up right here. And so using this data, you just get a very different understanding of how your business operates, and it helps you make better decisions, and it helps us collaborate across teams at Jackson Family Wines. And so when we talk about what we can do about it, we usually talk about, here are our strategies. These are probably not going to be unique to us. I think everybody can focus on electrification, renewable energy, what we can do with regen farming. We like to protect nature in there. That doesn't directly come into greenhouse gas footprints, but it is good to do. And we can talk about the value of nature and biodiversity. And then supply chain engagement is really how we address those scope 3. I didn't realize there were animations in here, but when we talk about what can we do, we're going to tell our story about lightweighting. And I don't think that's new for anybody here. Product lightweighting, that is a huge opportunity. And so we've worked to do that across a huge portion of our portfolio. We've also worked to add a lot of renewable energy. We're adding EV chargers and testing electric vehicle fleets. And then we've been using renewable diesel, which for us has definitely been a pretty targeted way to engage our fleet where we're not ready to electrify. And we've also done quite a bit with unpacking our product transport. I think I'll probably give one case study, and then I might talk just briefly about some things that are not in the slides. But I do think packaging for many people is going to be one of the easier opportunities to start. And here you can see what we've been able to do to reduce our bottle weight. And this is ongoing. I think one of the key things here is making sure that continuous innovation, continuous improvement is a big part of this. And just taking this approach, we built a really powerful partnership with our procurement team, with our brand team. So now collectively, everybody is working to make bottle lightweighting a priority. And it's interesting, you can see it by the numbers. It's also interesting to see it by dimensions. We spend a lot of time talking about consumer perception, how people are going to really appreciate the bottle. And you can see here the different molds superimposed over each other. I would say the modifications, they are significant in our world, but they're also relatively minor, right? And I think that's one of the things to realize for consumers. We like to think our consumers care about good wine. We want the packaging to really respect the quality of the wine and everything we do. But a lot of times when we're talking about bottle lightweighting, we're not really impacting the consumer experience, and we can make a pretty substantial improvement in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions. So those are the main slides that I wanted to share. But I think one thing I'll say before passing off to Molly, this packaging story, that's one that everybody can act on right now. I actually don't think you need to do a greenhouse gas assessment to know that packaging is where it makes sense. I think doing that, you might unpack which molds and which brands would be most impacted. But I think some of the things that are very valuable, doing a greenhouse gas assessment, we're now able to engage with our bottle manufacturers. And we have really good information about, hey, this bottle manufacturing plant actually has much higher recycled content than this one. We would prefer to get more glass bottles from that place. Or working with our distributors, we're able to see, hey, this distributor, they did an air shipment of wine to Florida. Why are they doing that instead of rail? We're able to kind of have much more targeted conversations. And scope 3, I'll say, is daunting because it's outside of your direct control. But that can almost be an opportunity to say, really, if you engage your partners in the right way, a lot of it is trying to have this ripple effect that our distributors are about 15% of our greenhouse gas footprint. We're regularly working with them, and anytime they make a change, it directly impacts us. So I think I'll probably wrap there because I think Molly's going to get into some details about all the work they've been doing. But I just think if you haven't done greenhouse gas accounting, I would say get started. And I hope Molly can speak to this too, but I have personally found having this level of knowledge about your business really can be a competitive advantage for just understanding your business in a different way, and then starting to collaborate across departments to really make smart, strategic decisions for the business that benefit the climate, but they're actually just good business decisions.
Love that message, Aaron. Molly, why don't you go ahead and pull up your slides there? But the message of just getting started, I think, is great advice, and a lot of great resources within IWCA, within CSWA's toolkit, all that such. So get after that. But also that language that the greenhouse gas world gives you to engage not only inside the company but with your suppliers. I think that's a great message to get to. So Molly, please hop in.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks, everyone. I think engaging suppliers and having enough information to ask great questions and to have targeted conversations is such a great way of framing why these things are really important to do, not just for compliance, obviously for the legislation, which is so interesting. Thank you, Anna, for going through all of that detail. It's a pretty fun position for me right now as the less technical voice in the conversation. So I'm going to briefly run you through, I guess, a few things that we do at Spotswood, and give you a little bit of a background, and then we can move into Q&A. So I'll keep it pretty brief, but it's fun to speak after Aaron because Spotswood was the first non-founding member who joined International Wineries for Climate Action. So we've been doing greenhouse gas inventory since 2018. The first two inventories that we did were with a consultant. We outsourced for those. I think that was a really important and great way to do it, honestly, is to invest in at least a great baseline, a very rigorous baseline inventory, and be able to ask a lot of questions to a person that's an expert in that field. That certainly tasked me or tooled me with the information that I needed to run all of our carbon accounting in-house. So I do all of our greenhouse gas accounting or modeling, whichever way you want to use that language. We do it in-house, and we are members of IWCA, so we use the calculator that's the proprietary calculator for International Wineries for Climate Action, which really does make things pretty easy. There's a decent amount of time put into it, but once you start to get comfortable with the questions that you're asking, and then some really basic kind of tools that you can use to keep things organized, it's not as daunting as it originally seems. I can vouch for that. So the first slide is just to give you an idea kind of what we're working with. And really, it's been fun to actually see from Lisa's original slides that were like, what, learn. I've been taking notes while you guys have been chatting, but Lisa's kind of like learn, assess and plan, implement. John mentioned analyze, act, accelerate. There's all of these through lines, right? We're all saying very similar things. And basically, it's like spend some time measuring what's happening, doing an inventory, outsourcing, asking for help for that first step, I think is important from our perspective. And then what do you do with that information? It's not just about doing the numbers. The numbers are actually really helpful and meaningful in driving business strategy and making decisions, making plans. So this is just a really quick screen grab from a few of my Google Doc sheets. Honestly, just thought I would bring you right into the to the nitty gritty. So we did a first inventory in 2019, well, 2018, but the first audited was 2019. You can see we were at 458 metric tons equivalent. So that's pretty cute, realistically speaking, from a numbers perspective, Spotswood. And this is what's also interesting. We're a very different scale, right? So it's really cool to have a representation of a large facility that has so much ability to make impact with small tweaks. Like I just took down that note of your glass reduction, Aaron, with the reduction of 4,149 metric equivalent tons. So this is just giving you an idea of what scope we're talking about and scale. Spotswood is deeply driven by making impact through business, and business is a force for good. We're very small. So a lot of the time it's actually about advocacy work, supporting organizations that do great work, and speaking on behalf of them, despite the fact that our absolute emissions are small. So we're never really going to shift the needle by reducing 400 metric tons off the planet. But you can see here, basically, we've made our goal. We wanted to reduce our emissions by 35% by 2030. This is sort of in a line with the UN's Race to Zero and the International Wineries for Climate Action requirements. So we basically just worked out what that math looks like, and then worked out what we needed to do, built a plan around how to achieve that. So if you want to jump to the next slide, Lisa. Again, over years, and to John's point, we do this inventory every year. We audit every other year as part of the requirements for International Wineries for Climate Action. But again, if you don't want it to be a membership piece, you can just be doing it anyway. I think for a small business, every other year is totally fine. It's nice to know the changes that you're doing and be able to track progress and continue to help come back to have a North Star of making, business decisions around glass lightweighting or shifting carriers from a fulfillment perspective. Like all of these things, it can help really come back to what's our goal here and why are we, what are we trying to do with our business and what are we trying to solve for? So you can see we've got a couple: product, transport, and packaging. Our classic, our first emission inventory, employee commute, and business travel was huge. So the only thing I'll say is I do think hotspots are universal generally across wineries, but I do think scope and scale matters. Our inventory, our emissions on site, because our vineyard is tiny, our scope one's lower, right? We have less vineyards, we have less fuel usage, all those things. That's really not the place to focus for us right now. The place to focus for us was how are our people getting to work? How are we spending our, our carbon budget, which I'll show you in a second for business travel, thinking about business travel as like a carbon budget versus a financial budget has been something that's been huge for us, honestly. So I think it's just like being able to look, and your own inventory will be nuanced to you with what's easy as a lever, like what's your low hanging fruit. And I do think that there's nuance there that will change based on the size of your business or, you know, some of your core values or any of those things. So that's just to give you an idea of how our main drivers of emissions have shifted and evolved over time. Yeah, so if you want to jump to the next one, Lisa. I'm not expecting anyone to read this. This is literally just to get a kind of a vision for like how I do it. If anyone actually is interested in super nitty-gritty stuff, I'm very open with sharing anything. So I've just popped except that's gone to hosts and panelists. I'll pop my email in the chat in a second if you want any of these documents just to get a good sense. But basically, it's like identifying hotspots and making genuine long-term 10-year plans around reduction and what that's going to look like. The cool thing I would say about tracking GHGs, other than, you know, it sounds pretty dry, quite frankly, there's a lot of terminology, there's a lot of spreadsheets. It's a really cool modeling tool, if this, then that kind of opportunity. So like it's an opportunity to play with, oh, okay, what does it look like if we reduce the glass weight of this SKU? What does it look like if we reduce the glass weight of all of these SKUs? What does it look like if we shift our warehouse to an East Coast spot that we can rail everything to and fulfill East Coast sales over there? The possibilities of playing with numbers and kind of really helping dial in and drive decision making is honestly what I think is the most exciting piece of all of these tools. To help obviously move towards a more carbon neutral environment, which from a big picture perspective is an agriculturally based business. None of us have an option. If we want to continue to make good product, we're going to have to be part of the solution. So again, this is super nuanced and nitty gritty, but just to give you an idea of like the hotspots. And this is, I've got, I don't know, 10 pages of these documents all the way to, well, 2035 right now. Because obviously you want to like pace these things out too. You're not going to change every single thing about your business and the way that you're doing things in the next 2 years. So knowing what needs to happen, spacing it out, I kind of think of it like a replanting a vineyard, right? You're not going to rip everything out and replant everything at once. It's like, okay, where are the spots that we need to prioritize right now? And what's happening to this spot 5 years from now? What's happening to this spot 10 years from now? These are long-term kind of strategies, I guess, informed by data. You want to jump to the next one, Lisa? This is my carbon budget. It's fun sales team conversation to have. Obviously, I just want to say right out off the bat, a sustainable business is also a profitable business. So that tension will constantly come up of like, you know, obviously what's the right thing from an environmental perspective and the reality of like, hey, we need to be out in the market and be selling wine, particularly right now. I'm sure we're all feeling it. It's a hard time in market. Being present in market is important, but knowing what you're spending and how much you've got to spend, right? So like I usually set a budget for a year from a carbon perspective, from an emission perspective for travel. And it's just like a financial budget. It's a model. It's not a set in stone, but it's like if we're starting to surpass this, let's look at it and think about it and bring some intention and strategy around our decision making instead of just willy-nilly. Like, I'll be honest, 2018, when we first did our inventory, we'd flown, I think, to Europe 5 times, Asia 5 times. We're a 9,000 case winery. Like, why are we going to these markets so much? Because the owner loves to travel, which is great. But, you know, bringing intention and thought into the travel piece was actually huge for us because it was larger than it should have been for the size of our business. So that's just one example of some nuance there. And then you can jump to the next one, Lisa, and then I'll wrap up. This is glass lightweighting. So just to jump on to Aaron and what he'd mentioned, we have brought our estate Cabernet, which is at, you know, $285 a bottle. So this is kind of a big piece of what we're trying to advocate for as well, that high quality wines don't need to be in really heavy bottles. So we've reduced our glass weight from 798 grams to 495 for our estate Cabernet, which is a 38% reduction over a 4-year period. And if you want to jump again, Lisa, real quick. that's kind of the pie is 19 to 2023. So we've done a 10% reduction of total emissions. And yeah, glass lightweighting, reducing business travel, having EVs for employees to reduce employee commute. They're all some things we've been focusing on. But yeah, I'll probably wrap up there because I know we want a little bit of time for Q&A. And if you have any other questions, shoot me an email. I can share anything with you guys that is helpful.
So phenomenal. Love your insights there, Molly. Definitely anybody jump in here with some questions if you have any. But I want to remind everybody that your title is Director of Winery Strategy, if I remember right, Molly. And so this is a fraction of what you're doing, and you're still doing all this work, right? Which is a great job, obviously, but also just a testament to the fact that this is something that's possible. And so let's keep that in mind. I mean, there's definitely a lot of work here. You've been doing it for a few years. You've got some time. You had a consultant come in and kind of help you early on. So I think that's a good path for people to kind of contemplate. Aaron, do you all do this internally? Do you guys have consultants support you? How does your approach?
We do probably a mix of everything, and I think really we had done a lot of work to have this be in-house, and actually just this last year we're now utilizing GHG software, which we're very excited about, and I see some of the faces on this webinar. So I think we're waiting to see how that pans out, but right now I think we're very excited about having a software approach. I do think that has a lot of features and functionality, and so I would recommend that, but I also know that that can come with a price tag that, can sometimes be a little bit of a barrier to people, which is why I would still recommend people start with the IWCA website. But then many companies, if you have the resources, are finding that software solutions do come with added features, including ways to engage directly with your supply chain.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in really quickly there because you're working with them. I'm happy to say that it's North Star Carbon Management do a really great job. And I do think if you're not going to go the actual formal consultant route, that there's more and more really great solutions. And their calculation tool is so user friendly and makes things really simple. So yeah, there's a couple really good options to get started for sure, whether it's IWCA and I mean, a lot of these people are all working together nowadays too to try to strengthen and combine the effort. So it's not like it's a one or the other kind of thing. Like they can be integrated really well together as well.
Yeah, I also just think that the community is a super collaborative group, right? So lots of people who really are looking to support each other. But also, Molly, you were talking about how you have verification every other year, which is part of the IWCA requirements. But it goes to show you can make it, adapt it for what makes sense for your business. And I think that's a key aspect going on there. Anna, I did want to ask a question for you. Around timelines. I know this is one of your most favorite topics. So when is this required? I think I remember that CARB was going to have guidance in the middle of this year, and now you're talking about the end of the year.
Oh yeah.
Are there chances it's going to slide further? Read some tea leaves for us.
Right. So 219 extended the timeline to July 1st of 2025. And it won't be the first time that there's an agency that, misses a deadline. But I think they'll probably adjust based on the comments that they're receiving. What we heard at the workshop was that it would be by the end of the year. So I think that some of those things are going to get adjusted. It doesn't mean folks should rely on that, of course, because, the deadlines are in statute. However, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw those move. The other interesting thing, talk about things on your plate. What I mentioned about the Allen bill, that was the extended producer responsibility for packaging. And so we all know we have all of these reporting obligations coming down the pike. I think it's important to remember that where you can find help, if you can afford it, whether it be software or, a consultant, it's something to consider because these things aren't going to go away. And I think they're going to increase as California sees itself as the climate leader in the nation.
Yeah, If I can just jump in there too really quickly, because it reminded me of something I wrote down and I didn't say, Anna, was as there is like a financial case for it too. It's expensive, like it feels expensive to get an invoice from a consultant or from a membership that helps sort of track and measure emissions, but the actual cost savings from implementation of a lot of these solutions is pretty remarkable, honestly, particularly if you're starting with packaging. So I do think that sometimes it's that investment in the short term to actually really build a plan to integrate some cost savings along the way. And that there is a true business case for it too, from a financial perspective. And I'd forgotten to say that.
Phenomenal.
So thank you.
Excellent point to end on. Lisa, any last comments from your side of things?
No, I just say thank you all so much. I think that was a really fascinating conversation, and we did record it so we can share it for everyone. There's people who also registered that wanted the recording, so we'll share that. But yeah, thank you all so much. Please do check out the toolkit, and you'll be able to find a lot more resources there. CSWA climatetoolkit.org. But thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank
Wonderful.
you, Lisa.
Okay,
Thanks,
take care.
everyone.